Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this video presentation. In this essay I'd like to focus on what some may say are the unanswered questions about the key and decisive battles of Alexander the Great, and we're sort of going back, as you know, to the 330s BC here. Nothing that follows here is meant to minimise the very impressive achievements of Alexander the Great as a battlefield general and a charismatic military leader. But let's just go over the issues here. Now, from a resource perspective, if you look at sort of Macedon and Greece and the Persian Empire stretching at the time from the Mediterranean shores of what is modern-day Turkey right across into what today is northern India, thousands of kilometres, taking in what is modern-day Turkey, Iran, Iraq and so on, Afghanistan and the like. With a population of around 30 million and vast areas around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and all around there, with some very, very rich agricultural land. And the entire population of Greece at the same time was about 2 million. So a 30 million empire and a total Greece of a population of 2 million, with on the whole some pretty poor agricultural land. Now at this time there was a lot of internal dissent in the Persian Empire, which is reflected in the frequent and regular uprisings all across because you're looking at many different, if you like, nationalities within the Persian Empire. And the Persians actually had quite a good, as administrators and organisers, they're actually quite good, considering the day, and they had like a Pony Express mail service. They were pretty good in a lot of ways, or pretty effective. And because they were such good administrators, they were able to have, for a while at least, quite a large empire. But this was starting to disintegrate and had been in a state of flux for quite a while. Egypt tried to break away from the Persian Empire, and various other provinces and groups and tribes tried to break away, or were demanding much more autonomy and didn't want to pay so much tax and all this sort of stuff. So there were frequent uprisings and acts of succession, all sorts of things like that, which was straining the military resources to breaking point. Now the Persian military was really, they were designed to really be garrison troops putting down local tribal uprisings and so on. They weren't really a first-rate battlefield army. They did have a nucleus of well-trained battle-seasoned guys, but they weren't typically engaging in frontline combat with another first-rate army. The Macedonians, by contrast, often were. So this is a consideration. So King Darius, who hadn't actually been on the throne for very long, he had to walk a bit of a tightrope of this time of negotiation and concession and diplomacy and cutting deals and so on, because he just simply couldn't be strong everywhere. There was just too much unrest, too many uprisings, and it couldn't be dealt with by concentrating military resources and effecting crushing victories. This would only have created bad blood, and in the meanwhile other areas are uprising and taxes aren't being collected and so on. So it was the Persian Empire was really staggering and tottering along at the time that Alexander arrived. Now a couple of years or a few years previous, there was a small detachment of Macedonians that had come into Persia to stir up trouble, and particularly along that western seaboard where there were a lot of Greek populated cities, but they'd been defeated by the local forces, and so and Alexander of course had no myth as this great god that he later was to have. Now the three battles that brought the Persian Empire undone during this time were the Battle of Granicus River, Issus and Gaugamela. In each of these battles the Macedonians were outnumbered, depending on whose numbers you want to look at, and the number there's a wide variance in numbers here. They're outnumbered anything from 2 to 1 to 6 to 1 on the battlefield. Now, in all cases, the Persians held quite a good defensive, well-organised position, that was well put together. It wasn't amateurs or two-bit punks that put it together. Alexander was the one seeking a decisive battle, so the Persians really had the option of sort of waiting, to some extent at least, waiting while Alexander would seek them out. So they could pick the battlefield, pick the defensive position, and were able to pick ground that was generally unsuitable for wide Greek phalanx deployments. And Alexander's Greek phalanx with the 20-foot long pikes, that was pretty formidable. And so the Persians quite sensibly selected areas where the phalanx deployment would be complicated and difficult to do, and therefore neutralising a lot of Alexander's advantage in those phalanx formations. And similarly, the Persians hired a lot of Greek mercenaries who were also using the phalanx, which again cancelled out some of that advantage that Alexander would have had. Now, on paper, in each of the engagements, the Persians should have won, or at least inflicted heavy casualties on Alexander's forces. Yet the claimed historical battle casualties indicate that Alexander was inflicting casualties on the Persians at a rate to 20, 30, 50 to 1 almost. This seems utterly implausible. So armies with more than between them 100 to 150k combatants raging for hours across kilometres of battleground, and yet the Macedonians supposedly only sustained 100 or 200 casualties. I just don't buy that. I don't even agree that that's possible. The myth is that Alexander, on the spur of the moment, unilaterally and arbitrarily decided to engage in a cavalry charge against impossible odds that won the day. So this is very unlikely, and more to do, I think, with myth making than any known reality. So let's work through these battles and look at the basis of and the balance of probabilities. And I think we might see a different picture, certainly from the one that's been handed down through the histories. Now, the Persian king and his advisors were well aware of the military capabilities of the Macedonians, and Alexander's military successes in Greece were also known. So this was no secret tactical shock or something that no sort of blitzkrieg and combined arms type things that came along in World War II. There was no surprises or secrets or anything like this. The Persians knew pretty much what to expect. Now, at Granicus River, which was the first battle, which is in sort of modern day Turkey, the Persians held an advantage of 3 to 1 in cavalry, which were of decent quality. They were experienced and trained. 5,000 phalanx Greek mercenaries, between 14 and 15,000 Persian infantry, the majority of which again were battle seasoned and experienced. So this gave a Persian advantage, depending on whose numbers when you look at, of 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1. In the worst case estimates, it's a 3 to 2 advantage. But nonetheless, if you look at the advantage, the Persian advantage in archers and slingers and missile troops, that's 2 to 1. Now, the Granicus River is quite a well-defended position, so if Alexander's going to attack, he's got to go down a river, down an embankment, across a river, up quite a big steep embankment on the other side to then make the attack. So this is not a good position to be in. And yet, according to the histories, Alexander not only won the battle, but he had something like 100 casualties. That's not 100,000 or 1,000, that's only 100, whilst inflicting 6,000 casualties on an enemy that's at least 2 to 1 with numerical superiority and a huge advantage in missile troops. I just want to give you an idea here. Now, the Persians are well done with archers, and the Persians typically have quite a good contingent of archers and slingers and missile troops and so on. So Alexander's forces are going down a river embankment in full view of the missile troops and the archers. Now it's nearly a mile to go from Alexander's position to where the Persians are, and the last 200 metres is they're going up a grade, or going through the river and then up the grade. So they'll be moving slowly through the river, whilst they're covered with thousands of archers and missile troops, and yet they supposedly receive almost 0 casualties in this. This seems inconceivable. Like by any examination, if you're moving slowly in mass, totally packed with arrows and goodness knows what raining down upon you, you're sustaining a lot of casualties. But for some reason, they had almost none. Now, the accounts of the battle, some of which were written hundreds of years later, by the way. So the accounts of the battle suggest a Macedonian cavalry charge and infantry attack were both repulsed by the Persians. Cavalry charged again, but was also repulsed with what was described as a heavy barrage of javelins. Now, these javelins were no small business. They were very effective and very sharp points, steel points, that sort of thing. They would have attracted substantial casualties. Then we're supposed to believe that Alexander, watching all these attacks, Macedonian attacks being repulsed, he got the elite companion cavalry, as they were called, and as soon as he appeared, the whole Persian army folded and fled. So the companion cavalry, numbering about 2,000, they had to cross the river and climb the steep riverbank. But but none of them, either through javelins or arrows, or none of them suffered any casualties. Now, if they, in order to have that that impact at that point in the line, they'd need to, the cavalry with Alexander at the front would need to be in a very tight formation, which is very hard to maintain as you're going through a river and up an embankment. Not impossible. I mean, they're quite well trained, but they need to, now if they're in that tightly packed sort of, if you like, heavy hitting group, they would have been easily picked off. Arrows and missiles would have showered on this tight group, and you wouldn't need to be a good shot or anything. You would hit something no matter what, and so the casualties would have been very heavy, not only among the riders but the horses as well. But somehow we're supposed to believe that this quote, which again was nearly a mile in its distance, that Alexander and his crowd suffered almost zero casualties here. Let's suppose they'd been widely dispersed. Then there was no way that it had any shock value when they came across the Persian cavalry, which was had a 3-to-1 numerical advantage over the companions. Equally, trying to move 2,000 cavalry in the heat of battle with bodies peeling off in all directions, going up a hill, and this sort of stuff under attack from showers of arrows and so on, trying to keep a tight group there. So you do get a heavy hit as you get to the other line. That's very, very difficult. It's not impossible, but very difficult and very unlikely given that terrain. So Alexander travelled over a mile with a tightly packed group of cavalry across an active battlefield in front of thousands of missile troops, and yet he got no casualties. And then we have to accept that at the mere appearance of Alexander at the head of the cavalry, they haven't really done anything at this point. The entire enemy just folded and fled and ran away, all except the Greek mercenaries that were cut to pieces. Now this seems highly improbable. 100 casualties for the battlefield where you inflict 6,000? I don't accept that at all. So, and most of those casualties were the Greek mercenaries. How was it the Greek mercenaries couldn't flee the field? Why is it only the Persians could? Because there was Persian infantry there, some of it quite heavy infantry, so they couldn't have run off easily. There weren't enough horses for everybody, so why was it they got away but the Greek mercenaries didn't? So there's a few sort of things, I wonder what's going on there type questions. Now, Darius wasn't present at the Granicus River battle, King Darius, but the satraps, like the regional governors and generals, were in charge, and many of those, certainly at the apex, had quite a lot of military experience and knew what they were doing. The army, the troops were well trained and experienced. So now, if the Persian army was made up of totally untrained green troops who'd never seen battle, they were unwillingly sort of pushed into military service, and they wanted to be anywhere but on the battlefield, and where the generals were all green and didn't know what they were doing. Troops were all hungry and thirsty, and they didn't have proper equipment. And if you put all that in, and they're up against a very, very disciplined, experienced army with expert generals, then maybe you'd get something like this. But that wasn't what happened here. These were experienced generals with most, not all, but most of them, experienced battle-seasoned troops. So something else clearly happened here. You don't get an entire army of that size just folding and running away, and the Macedonians only sustaining 100 casualties. You just don't get that. Now, my sort of take would be that, or the possibility, again, balance of probability here, is that King Darius sent his satraps and his regional governors to go and negotiate with Alexander. Look, what do you want? How much do we have to pay you? What do we have to give you? That sort of thing. And so the army was lined up just to show, hey, we're serious. If you don't want to negotiate, we're serious about fighting it out if you want to. So maybe the satraps and generals really expected it. They thought they just lined their army up for show, and then they'd sit down and negotiate, and it would all be over. I suspect something like that was a possibility. And they were really unprepared for battle. So Alexander agreed to negotiate, and then decided to attack, treacherously attack, and so they unprepared for that and were shocked by it, panicked and ran. So that's a possibility. Now, another possibility is that Darius or his agents had paid bribes to the Macedonians' allies and this sort of thing to defect, and they promised to defect, took the money, but ended up not defecting and stayed loyal to Alexander. So the Persians, expecting an easy time of it, were, holy crap, look at that, these guys haven't defected. The other option is, and this is probably the more likely one in the overall scheme of things, Alexander paid bribes to various Persian groups and tribes, the Bactrians or whatever it was that were made up part of the wider. Because remember, Persia's a huge empire covering vast areas, going to some of those tribes and saying, look, we'll paying bribes or offering them great booty and riches if they either defect to Alexander, or what was often the case, how they did things then. Hey, at the signal from me, the trumpet blast, just melt away, just disappear into the desert, and I'll pay your bribe. And that I think was certainly a big likelihood, because you don't get an army just fold and melt away at the first sign of the first sign of battle, and these guys are melting away and disappearing. You just don't get that in reality. So I would suggest that they were bribed and were paid to melt away. And if you get large detachments of troops just suddenly disappearing, and then the troops that are there realise, holy crap, I'm going to be surrounded if I don't hit the road myself, then you get that melting away, or that fleeing the battlefield so quickly. But what we have to accept is that the troops fled the battlefield at the moment the battle started, pretty much, and that's not something that I think is reflected in any reality there. I think this idea that Alexander got like 100 or so casualties but inflicted many thousands, I think that's improbable and implausible in the extreme. Now, Darius, wasn't a generalissimo like Alexander was, but he was no novice to war and the reality of battles either. He was quite a seasoned administrator and so on. So this idea that he was some useless bum doesn't really sort of count here, I don't think. Again, just reinforcing, I think the Persian battle units were bribed or encouraged to change sides, or just simply vanish from the battlefield at the last minute, because you don't want to leave too early, because then the enemy's got time to take corrective action. It has to be just a sudden thing at the last minute once they get the signal, and that then causes just the sheer confusion. The ambush factor alone causes them to, and this was often used in ancient warfare, by the way, paying the other side or part of the other side to change sides, or again run away from the battlefield. But that's the only explanation I can sort of come up with to think why they suddenly fled, and when they had a superior position and a decisive majority in troops and supplies, the better situation all around, yet still they fled. It doesn't make any sense. Now, the next sort of major battle was Issus. This time Darius is present. And Alexander's, this is in mid-southeastern Turkey, or what modern-day Turkey. Alexander's even more outnumbered than before, and depending on the numbers, he's outnumbered anywhere between sort of 2.5 to 1 to even 10 to 1 at the outside numbers, which I view as fanciful. So there's at least 150 to 175,000 combatants on the battlefield, approximately 50,000 of those being the Macedonian troops. Now, this was another incredibly quick victory for Alexander, where apparently he only suffered about 200 casualties. That's not 200,000 or anything, 2,000. That's just 200 casualties, as against 30,000 casualties inflicted on the Persians. Like the battle before, this outcome seems highly unlikely in any reality. At the very least, Darius had somewhere between 30 and 35,000 battle-hardened, experienced troops. A little bit less than Macedonians, but not hugely so. And then 60 to 75,000 additional troops, most of whom had military experience, but you wouldn't call them first-line battle troops. Now, we're supposed to believe here that these guys, all of them, folded at the first blush of battle and to be massacred by the pursuing Macedonian cavalry. Again, just highly improbable. Battle-experienced troops with experienced generals, well supplied, so on. The minute they get a glint of an enemy sword in the sun, they turn tail and run. No, just don't buy it. If they were, again, all green troops, beginners with no experience, never seen a battle, no training, they didn't have proper equipment, so, okay, then they were hungry, that I would get. But that's not what's happening here. Now remember, the myth of Alexander's invincibility didn't even exist at this time, so the awe-inspiring figure of myth that he later became wasn't present here. So this wasn't an issue, oh no, Alexander the Great's here, fuck, we need to run. That wasn't a play, that wasn't part of the situation here. Now, we should also consider and something that reflected the tenuous grip King Darius had on the tottering, staggering Persian Empire was he offered Alexander the western third of the Persian Empire, plus a sizable cash payment and a Persian princess in marriage. Now, someone with the potential resources of such a large empire doesn't negotiate in this way unless they're hard-pressed on all fronts. Because again, Darius is looking at uprisings and that thing all over the empire. I mean, he can't concentrate all the resources on fighting Alexander, so he's trying to negotiate his way out of what clearly is a difficult situation. This idea of why was Alexander so confident of victory against such numerical odds, assaulting a well-defended position. Now, Alexander is considerably outnumbered. A lot of very experienced troops in the Persian army there. It's a good position. It's well defended. It's well laid out. There's quite a few experienced Persian generals there, and yet somehow Alexander. I mean, if you put aside his rash impetuousness and this sort of thing, and his supposed sort of dashing demeanour, that's still a high risk thing. And here's someone offering him, the Persian king. Here's someone offering Alexander, look, you can have the western third of the empire. Rather, you can have this, you can have that, you can have my daughter in marriage. I'll give you a shitload of money. Alexander's got all that, a lot of glory, a lot of riches to be had there. Yet somehow he goes, nah, not interested when he's up against these odds on the battlefield. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, why would he be so confident of victory when he's that outnumbered? Again, with a lot of experienced troops on the other side. Now, according to the history here, Alexander led approximately 10,000 infantry. I mean, less than that if you look at the vanguard of it, maybe 3,000 infantry. He led them across a river and up quite a steep incline, and it only took minutes to overwhelm the Persian infantry that was 3 times more numerous. And again, well trained, battle season, they were equipped. Now, given the terrain that the Alexander and this infantry had to sort of cover, you couldn't have had a useful phalanx formation. Certainly not in the classic sort of sense. So there's no way they could have used those formidable phalanx formations to get, I don't think, to effectively overwhelm the enemy. And again, he's having to sustain heavy showers of arrows and slings and goodness knows what as they're crossing the river and coming up the embankment. And yet we're supposed to believe that just the mere appearance of these guys and a few encounters and a bit of pushing and shoving, and the entire Persian army just collapses and runs away. That I just don't believe that. Again, the only plausible explanation is a large number of the Persian army were bribed to switch sides or vanish at the signal. Now, King Darius supposedly left the battlefield in such haste. Now, again, this suggests that the battle suddenly changed within at the drop of a hat. That just suddenly Darius realised, it's all over. I need to get out of here. Now, that doesn't happen in a typical battle. Not that it can't happen, but Alexander hasn't. There's no masterstroke. There's no delivery of a secret weapon here. That somehow we're supposed to believe there was within a few minutes of tussle, the whole Persian army collapsed and Darius ran away. Again, I don't accept that. Now, he left in such haste that his entire royal baggage train and crown jewels and wife and family and everything, Darius left behind. This is used historically to demonstrate that Darius was a coward and a weakling and and contrasted that with the robust manliness and hairy-chestedness of Alexander. I don't buy that. The more likely thing is that Darius went back with his bodyguard to collect his wife and family. His mother was there too, for goodness sakes, along with the crown jewels and the serious, the gold train and all this sort of stuff. And the soldiers or the groups guarding his family had already switched sides, had treacherously gone over to Alexander. And so as Darius approached, he realised, Alexander's that these guys have changed sides, and Alexander's effectively taken control of all of that. And I think that's what happened, because Darius only had a short distance to go to collect his. When I say short distance, a few k's to go to collect his family and them, and he had plenty of horses and chariots and carts and whatnot. But somehow he just left it all behind and ran away. I don't think, if it was at all possible, he would have collected them. So something happened that prevented him from doing that. What we're led to believe is that the cavalry, the Macedonian cavalry, had come in and were chasing the left front of Alexander's left flank, where the Persians were overwhelming the Macedonians, and yet the overwhelmed Macedonians only suffered a handful of casualties. How could you be overwhelmed and only suffer 1 or 2 casualties? That doesn't make any sense. So Alexander's cavalry went after the Persians on Alexander's left flank, which left Darius plenty of time to gather, supposedly left plenty of time to gather the baggage train and his family, yet somehow he ran away. I just don't buy that. I think there was a major switching of sides from supposedly loyal Persian troops, and that's why Darius fled while leaving his family behind. Now the final battle of the campaign, or decisive battle of the big battles, was then at Gaugamela, which is sort of 18 months later, and that's located in middle north, sort of modern day Iraq. Now again, Alexander's outnumbered by at least 2 to 1, probably closer to 3 to 1 in reality. And in this battle, we're supposed to believe that the Macedonians sustained only about 1,000, depending on who 1,200 say casualties, whilst they supposedly inflicted 50,000. So 1,200 dead is against 50,000 dead they inflicted. I don't believe that for a moment. Now again, the Persian army was well laid out in a well-defended, well-structured position. There was probably the highest number of experienced, battle-seasoned, loyal troops in this battle than there'd been in any of the previous battles. So, if anything, this was going to be a battle that would that the Persians should have won, and won fairly easily. So, how can we explain such an incredibly one-sided outcome of the battle when there are so many experienced battle-seasoned troops and generals on the Persian side? And again, we see the same sort of thing. The minute there's a bit of a tussle going on, the entire Persian army suddenly decides to vanish and run away and flee the battlefield. I just don't believe that. They know that they're going to be killed if they try and run away. If you're going to die, why would you risk it by trying to run? The Persian army was better supplied, better equipped than far more so actually than the Macedonians. Experienced generals, and yet they fled the battlefield almost from moment one. Now, to balance out the narrative of a dashing Alexander winning the day charging on his white horse, as is later claimed among his chroniclers, but if we take in a wider range of chroniclers, we see some inconsistencies in the information. So we see that in some mention here that Alexander calls back to Macedon for reinforcements because of the heavy battle losses he sustained in these battles. Well, hey, hold on a minute. According to the official histories, across the three major battles, Alexander lost less than 2,000 men, So something like 7%, 8% maybe in total, if we even include sort of serious injuries and things like that. 7 to 8% of the troop totals were lost, yet he needs large reinforcements from Macedon to cover for the battle losses, but he's had virtually no battle losses according to these official accounts. So that's an inconsistency there. Now, if indeed he did need large reinforcements, the reinforcements suggest that 2/3 of his army had perished in battle. Now, if that is the case, then that would suggest these battles were actually close-run things. Maybe they were decided by a cavalry charge at the last minute by Alexander. I don't know, but if you're not sustaining any casualties of note, why do you need to send back for large reinforcements, and why can you have no casualties but at the same time have 2/3 casualties? The two just simply don't add up. But if indeed those reinforcements were needed, that would suggest that those battles were hard fought and costly in lives. So in summary, bribery, treachery and deceits and under the table payments and so on played a much bigger part, if not a decisive part, in all of Alexander's victories, rather than did the brilliance of the Macedonian army or indeed Alexander's individual heroism. But what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below.